August 27, the day my sister got temporary custody. My children came to the courthouse with my sister that day, and while I was sitting in the courtroom, my daughter walked past the doors, and upon seeing me through the little window on the door, she squealed with excitement, started jumping up and down and waving at me. I was so happy to see her, and I waved back and I blew her kisses. At which point my sister got up from the other side of the courtroom, walked to the door, and placing herself between me and the window my daughter was peeking through, she bent down in my face, and with the most wretchedly wicked look and tone, she put her hand in my face and said, "No, stop it right now. You don't talk to her." In her mind, I don't deserve to even be able to wave at my children. It was a disgusting display of a maniacal ego and power trip. After the hearing, I stepped out in the hallway and realized that there was no hell or high water that was going to stop my son from getting that long overdue hug, and he had refused to budge until I stepped out of the courtroom and he got it. He squeezed me so tight it was hard to breathe and held on to me for several minutes until my sister made him let go. My daughter had joined the embrace as well. Because there were certain people standing around that my sister wanted to look good in front of, she invited me to have lunch with them. This was a huge surprise, and I was obviously thrilled, while at the same time livid, about being at my mentally ill sister's mercy to spend time with my own children, that I had raised for 16 and 10 years. Through the meal, I sat between my kids. I didn't order anything, but they both ate with one hand and held my hand with the other through the whole meal. This day, my children were the dirtiest and most unkept that I have ever seen them in their lives. Their clothes smelled like mildew and garbage. I asked my daughter why she hadn't brushed her hair or cleaned her nails, and she said that she couldn't find her hairbrush or nail clippers. When my son had first gone to Washington, and when I had finally gotten to speak on the phone for a full conversation with him, he asked me to send money for soap, shampoo, and toothpaste, because there was none in my sister's house. My son later sent me these pictures. I put them in collage format with captions and included them in a petition for an order of protection for my children, which was not granted. My sister has been married 4 times since having kids. Her first ex-husband, Lester, is now living with her. He's quite huge, weighing about 400 pounds, and everyone that meets him is a little afraid of him because he's just not right in the head. There's more to say about him later, but while I'm sharing these pictures, my son sent me this message. He said that he was being blamed for the condition of the house, even though my sister has always lived like this. And because my sister is supposedly legally blind, Lester accused my son of trying to make her trip over things so she would fall and become paralyzed. I know I don't need to defend something so absurd, but I don't see anything in these pictures that belongs to my son. I would not have let my son go if I'd have known that Lester was living there. He said that this was the cleanest her house had been in the year he had been there. The gun in this picture is just a photo sticker. I put it in there because amongst the emails my son sent me, one of them was about a high-caliber rifle that was rarely put away and often left in dangerous places, one of those places being right there, in my nephew's room. My adopted nephew, Miguel, gets brought into the story a couple times. He is the one that suffered brain damage from the brick that was thrown at his head. I've been told that he has been hospitalized several times for attempting suicide. He's been caught at school with razor blades, and my sister told my son that he has tried to kill her on multiple occasions. She's also told my son that he is schizophrenic, though that seems to be my sister's go-to diagnosis when she's diagnosing everyone around her. He is on psychotropic medication, but again, my sister would have everyone around her on medication if she could. Miguel is, however, quite off in his behaviors, and because of the strange things that he says sometimes, and his size and strength, it can be alarming at times. Miguel and his concerning behaviors are the reason that, in later events, my son will spend some time in juvenile detention. He said that there are always prescription bottles laying throughout the whole house. Uppers, downers, psychotropics, muscle relaxants, anti-anxieties. But wait a minute. I thought my son was suicidal. Like for real suicidal, not just a depressed teenager. Like so suicidal that you had to stop him from ending his own life. So suicidal that you had no choice but to intervene. And while he was kicking and screaming and crying and pleading, please don't do this. Please stop. Please don't put me in there. I want to go home. Though it broke your heart dearly, as any caring auntie would have to do. You had to have the police wrestle him down and tie him to a stretcher. Even though I had just driven 2,600 miles to come get him, and that's all he had wanted for a year, and the only reason he was depressed. But you had to do it out of love, to prevent him from ending his own life. Yet here he is, at a Dr. Kevorkian candy store. Here he is with endless options, all of them providing the absolute simplest and easiest method for taking one's own life. This is my daughter's room. She spent the first couple months sleeping on the floor in her cousin's room. My son even found a prescription for my daughter. My sister is fully aware that I do not want my children on medication and that I've opted out of several vaccinations for my daughter because of the negative health effects they had on my son. She forced my son on medication immediately after he arrived in Washington. She gave my daughter all of those vaccinations that I had fought doctors and schools for the last 10 years to keep out of my daughter, and now she has her on medication as well. This is where my son has been sleeping for a year and a half. I have nearly 10,000 pictures of my children's lives, and I've looked through all of them since they've been taken from me. There's not one picture in which our home was cluttered or messy. I've always gone above and beyond to create home environments for them that foster an appreciation for tidiness, responsibility, and that spark imagination and a sense of well-being. I've built custom rooms for them, specific to their interests and hobbies, always providing art stations to stimulate and encourage their creativity. All of these pictures are from a home that I poured my blood, sweat, and tears into and never wanted to move from. We lived there for 4 blissful years while we had no contact with my children's father or my family. Well, most of my family. But after their father learned of our whereabouts, our little heaven on earth became a living hell, and every good thing was taken from us. Since then, I have done nothing less than push myself to my physical and mental limits in order to pick up the pieces, put them back together, and hold them together, but never for longer than a year at a time before my children's father or a family member, or my children's father and a family member come along, and seeing that I've managed to put it all back together again, they set out to knock it all down again, and I repeat the cycle. But with each move, with each devastating blow, my focus has never wavered from a diligent dedication to raise up 2 good human beings. This is their closet. This is all their games. We play these things every day. Lots of educational games in here. And this is where they store their artwork. And here is Carpenter's music book,
and anything and everything that is
Science.
within my power to forge such individuals, I have earnestly devoted myself to doing for the last 17 years. And by good, I don't mean perfect or even amazing. I just mean good, unwilling to do wrong. That has been my highest priority, but in no way my only priority. I'm bringing all this up to show where my heart is. When we had to leave that house where we had lived for 4 years, we didn't just have to leave the house. My children lost their friends, schools, teachers, their routines, their sense of belonging somewhere, their security. They lost everything that mattered to a child and everything they had loved, everything except for me and their pets. But because of the magnitude of loss that my children experienced, and because my heart aches for my children when they suffer, I have hauled these giant green pillars single-handedly that each weigh around 200 pounds to 5 different homes. I have built bed after bed out of these things in an effort to help my children feel like no matter where they are living, no matter for how long or how short of a period of time they're living there, that they have a home.
When my daughter was afraid of the dark, I set her room up with remote control lighting.
All I'm getting at here is where my heart is. My heart beats for my children. Until they no longer need me, I live for my children. And it has to be evident in these pictures. It has to be evident in the videos I have. It has to be evident in my children's own words.
When I finally made it back home to Tennessee, I had no money and all of my belongings were at my parents' or in a shared storage unit shared with my parents. And when I returned, I discovered that they had changed the locks. Just prior to my getting sick 2 years ago, I had just bought some very nice furniture for the first time in my life, as well as a good PC, and my plan was to sell them to pay for an attorney. My parents said that they would get my things out of storage and out of their house, and then they would tell me when I could come and get it. I stayed in North Carolina for a week working for someone, helping them finish an addition on their home in exchange for their help moving my belongings. When the addition was finished, the homeowner told me to go. I learned that when you're really down and out, that's when people are the most likely to take advantage of you because they know that you're too overwhelmed to do anything about it. I returned to Tennessee and drove past my parents' home. I saw that all of my belongings were outside. The weather was calling for heavy rain that night and for several days ahead, so I pulled into their yard with hopes of getting as much of my belongings to the home I had previously rented before it started raining. My parents immediately called the police when they saw me. My parents told the police that I would have to wait until the next day. Again, another premeditated act of destruction. After one night in the rain, my belongings, at least the belongings that my parents didn't decide to keep for themselves, would be thoroughly drenched and destroyed. And they were. The furniture I had planned on selling was garbage, as well as most everything else. My computer miraculously survived simply because it was covered with other things that soaked up the water. My hard drives that contained my children's lives, 16 years worth of pictures, were not so lucky. Fortunately, after a small fortune was spent, someone was able to retrieve most of my pictures from the drives. I couldn't afford to rent a U-Haul because I would have never been able to load it and unload it by myself in one day, and any longer than one day was more than I could afford. So I had to move whatever I could salvage by myself, making trip after trip with the car that I had bought in Nebraska. Because of my back problems and having already spent 2 weeks sleeping scrunched up in my car, 1 week doing heavy lifting and hard labor for free in North Carolina, and then moving my belongings, I became completely debilitated, in such intense pain that several times I got stuck in certain positions for hours, my back locked up in a piercing Charlie horse that I could do nothing about. In that state, I spent a full week with no groceries, barely able to even crawl to the bathroom. For these first 3 weeks, my sister never answered her phone when I called for my once-a-week phone call. The heart-wrenching anguish over my children's plight, the anger, the pain, the hopelessness, had me contemplating whether I could even go on. Finally, though, my sister answered the phone, and I got to speak to my children. But everything was off limits to talk about, according to my sister, who threatened to hang up for any words reflective of me being their mother. My children were miserable, desperate, and pleading to come home. As soon as I could get around again, I started preparing a declaration, which is what I thought the next legal step was, and gathering all of my evidence, setting up the home and my children's rooms, taking pictures to prove that I wasn't homeless, as my sister alleged, and to prove my kids had appropriate rooms and such. Later, I would realize that this was 2 weeks' worth of wasted time, money, and energy, as it still to this day has not even been looked at by a judge, and I have since had to move from there because my parents called my children's father to inform him that my kids weren't with me, and so he should notify child support to end payments. They even provided him with a copy of the temporary custody order to prove it. So I immediately lost all income. I began applying for jobs, but day after day, application after application, none of them calling me back. It wasn't until I finally got an interview and was offered a managerial position that I learned why no one was calling me. This place had conducted the interview first, and then the background check. They had already told me that if the check came back good, the job was mine. After days of not hearing back, I asked them in person what the problem was. My background check was coming back with a restraining order for child trafficking on it. That was the last time I put an application in anywhere. I have since been taking general labor jobs from Craigslist. All of them labor-intensive, back-breaking work. Through all of this, losing the home that I had worked so hard for and that was so perfect for my kids and their pets, moving, and then being perpetually bombarded with legal assaults, which I've yet to cover here. Through all of this, I've been determined not to have to give up my children's pets, who have been the closest thing to family that we've ever had. They have been in our lives for over a decade. They have been my kids' best friends. Through thick and thin, they've been there by my kids' sides for so long that letting them go would feel like a death of a loved one. It's been a weekly struggle to be able to feed, not to mention finding a place where I could keep them all, not to mention keeping a place. I've been living in perpetual motion for 6 months now, often going days on my feet without ever sitting down, because there's not enough time to make enough money to pay rent, buy food, and also keep internet and phone going so that I can fight for my kids. On top of fighting for my kids, defending myself against more false accusations, trying to help my son defend himself in court because my sister's trying to destroy him and put him in juvie, so she's filing false charges against him. All of this combined with frequent messages from my son, not anymore, but for about 3 months, my son was messaging me, telling me about the atrocities that my sister is committing against them, which often escalated into life and death situations for my children, happening in the moment, and me not being able to do a thing about it, because if I call CPS or the police, it does absolutely nothing more than put my children in more danger, and the knowledge of which leaves me pacing like a caged lion, contacting people in places like the U.S. Marshal, the White House, Dr. Phil, begging for help, only to have people treat me like what I'm saying is too crazy to be true. All combined with my sister deliberately trying to cause me panic and deliberately torturing me with more made-up realities about my children. When I had driven past my sister's home, I was appalled by the type of neighborhood that my son had been living in. It was worse than any ghetto in Detroit. It reminded me of a movie called Trash, a movie about a couple kids that actually live in a dump in South America. Squalor is the most fitting description of how my sister is living, and now my children. The minority in their town, Spanish being the predominant language there, and I have since learned that it is obscenely high in crime, gangs, drugs, and shootings. This has been a prevailing concern in my mind since my first time there. Remembering my sister's complete lack of parenting, lack of awareness and attention to her children when they were small, which had not been a concern when I let my son go for a visit, him being a teenager. But realizing that my beautiful, pale-skinned, blue-eyed, blonde little girl was going to be in this neighborhood absolutely terrified me. I mean, it shook me to my core. My anxiety level about this has been off the charts. So almost a month after my daughter was taken, I finally got to speak to them on the phone. My daughter mentioned something about being left at school because nobody picked her up and she had to walk home. This had been the most unsettling thought and fear that I had had. I asked her to please never walk home alone again. And then I spoke to my son and asked him to please make sure that never happens again and to keep a very close eye on her when she's outside. My sister immediately jumped in and interrupted, stating that I needed to stop. She stated that this was why my calls had to be supervised, because I might behave like a mother, I guess. Because I truly am concerned about trafficking and don't consider it a play word for games, a word to throw around when you want to hurt other people, steal their children, or ruin their lives. Because I'm a protective parent, I need to be supervised, I guess.
But if I don't see the car or anything, just walk home all the way. It's not that far. It's like a block or two.
I know,
to
but
me.
I really am not comfortable with that at all. I mean,
I have a bicycle.
I worry about you being in the front yard.
You can't do this. This is part of why it's supervised calls. We're watching her. We're not leaving her alone in the middle of nowhere. We can see her. I've raised 3 boys. So,
Okay, I didn't know that I could not express my concern over her walking alone. I didn't realize that was something I couldn't do.
it's responsibility to take care of her. I got it covered.
Okay,
So, if she walks, then she walks. That's what choices I will make for her right now.
After my sister was made aware of how much this scared me and bothered me, from that day forward, my daughter has walked to and from school alone every day. I have said more prayers since that day than I have over the course of my lifetime combined. And just to prove my point about what her neighborhood is like, I recently came across this video.
The worst parts of Washington. You know when you see them, they're the parts of Washington where you don't want to go, if you can help it. The goal today is to highlight the cities in Washington that are the worst of them all. How do we do it? We measure the things most bad cities have. You know, where people are broke, where lots of people don't have a job, and where crime is sky high. We even measured the public school education levels. Let's get started. Our next stop on our worst journey of Washington is in Yakima. Lots of places in Yakima are essentially hole. There's a reason people call it Crackama, Yakavegas, or less cleverly, the butthole of Washington. Yakima has lots of poverty, crime, and drugs. Crime is more than double the national average, and it seems like every night on the local news there's stories about car thefts, assaults, sex offenders, shootings, and stabbings. Hispanic gangs are prevalent in Yakima. In fact, in some parts of the city, you could get iced for wearing the wrong hat, so you better play it safe if you want to stay out of trouble. On the bright side, since this part of Washington has so much meth use, you could probably make some extra money on the weekends. Just be sure to save some for your friends in Chehalis and Yakima. They're always ready to buy.
I mentioned in part 1 that the stress that I'm dealing with is going to take me out. I'm convinced that my heart is diseased from not just this experience, but from the emotional slaughterhouse I grew up in and from dealing with experiences like this ever since I've been a mother. This experience is just putting the nails in the coffin. Every time I hear my sister's voice or even think about her, my blood pressure spikes. I have to immediately walk outside and distract myself. Think about anything other than her. Otherwise, my heart will start racing so fast and pound so hard that it feels like it's going to seize up. And yes, I know that's a panic attack, but it's a crippling tightness in my chest that I feel like could easily turn from a panic attack to a heart attack. Even when I do have time to sleep, I can't because I have to get my children away from her. How can I sleep when I could be doing something to save them from being exposed to her psychopathy and cruelty a minute longer than they have to be? When I hear her voice, I have homicidal ideations. I feel like I could literally rip her head off of her body with my bare hands. There's no way that a year and a half of emotions like these has not been creating heart disease. My sister butted into our conversation again to tell me how well my son did on the SAT. The only reason she told me was because she feels like it's only because of him living there, as if she has anything to do with it. My son had read every classic several times each by the time he was 10. I'm talking about, Moby Dick. I've never had cable in my home. We had movie night 2 or 3 times a month, but otherwise we just didn't watch TV. I filled my home with books, art supplies, instruments, tools, things to create, invent, build, make art, make music. We spent quality time together. I read to my kids every day until about 4 years ago. Of course, my son got top in the state for reading and writing. Of course, he got top in the school for math. My sister, on the other hand, let the television raise her kids. Their greatest skills are playing video games. Trying to make these videos has been nothing short of psychological torture. Forcing myself to remember things that I want to forget, and listening to her speak, knowing how insane she really is, and that she has been able to steal my children and gradually break down 16 plus 10 years worth of my body, mind, heart, and soul investment. Anyways, also in the first phone call, my son mentioned that I should just do what the judge said I had to do. The judge never told me I had to do anything. What I realized, and later my son confirmed, was that my sister told my children that the judge ordered me to go to rehab and said that if I did, that they could be returned to me. So not only was this pulled out of thin air and another blatant lie, but she's trying to sell my children the lie, her fantasy reality that I'm a drug addict. So my children are left thinking, well, maybe my mom really is using drugs. I mean, if the judge ordered her to go to rehab, she must really be using drugs, right? And as if that wasn't bad enough, because it had been a month, not only were they left believing that maybe their mother really was using drugs, but that I cared more about continuing to do the drugs than I did about getting them back, because it had been a month and I wasn't in rehab. My sister knows full well that I don't use drugs. I mean, she's aware of this. She knows I don't use drugs. It's not as if she thinks I use drugs and so she's doing all this. She knows I don't, and that she is making this stuff up as she goes. So she's kidnapped my children. They beg and plead to come home. They want to come home. They have told her that they want to blow their brains out. She's aware that they have become suicidal because they are so miserable with her. So what kind of person, what kind of mentality is required to do this? I mean, she is trying to convince children that their mother, who has raised them, the only constant in their life, is not who they thought she was for 16 years or 10 years. As I'm making this video and arranging the clips, I must have clicked on some function I'm unaware of, but the same clip multiplied and I ended up hearing what I just said about 20 times in a row. And I suddenly remembered something else my son informed me of that my sister had been telling them. And it just hit home like a cannonball to the stomach. My son said that my sister was telling them that I had not raised them, that her and my parents have. And it was so absurd of a statement that I couldn't really even contemplate it. I just brushed it off as another ludicrous lie, another part of my sister's fantasy world. But it all just sunk in that my sister is recreating my children's life. She is writing a brand new narrative that not only justifies what she's done, but makes it seem not so radical or abrupt of circumstances. I recently looked at her Facebook page and I saw that she was posting pictures of my son from when he was really little. And it occurred to me that it was starting to look like she was his mother. My son also told me, and I did lose my cool over it at the time, but he said that whenever they mention me, my sister says, "I'm your parent now." And when I unfortunately had to listen to the recording again of her lecturing my son, I noticed that she referred to my son as her son's brother. This all explains why she is so fervently trying to erase me from their lives and has stopped letting me talk to them on the phone altogether. The more I write and talk about this, the scarier and more insidious my family becomes, and the more I panic about my kids and time, which will all result in even more sleep deprivation.
I hope you're the school counselor.
What did you talk about?
My anger issues
Oh.
and some depression.
What are you depressed? What are you depressed about?
That's the thing. There's so much drama.
Yeah, I know. I know.
I can't even be with my mama.
Well, you will soon.
You promise?
Yes, I promise.
The counselor said that I was smarter than most people would think. And he said that, like, all the teachers and all relatives probably don't think that I'm as smart as I really am.
Oh, I know how smart you are, dear.
I know! Because you've been with me my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
People like the teachers and the other kids in class and the other family and stuff. He said they probably don't know how smart you are, and I've only been with you for, 10 minutes? And to me, you already seem like you're at my age kind of smart.
I was just bragging about how smart you are a little bit ago.
To who?
To... Have you gotten any new clothes?
Oh, yeah. I don't need them. I kept saying. Not gonna be here that long. Won't need all these clothes.
You should do whatever is to, like,
Here's Mishka right now. Please.
you would have to do to get us back in.
I know that.
Like, go to rehab places and stuff.
Oh, Carpenter, yeah, that would make sense if I had a problem. That's...
But it doesn't matter. I didn't have a problem, you know.
I know, Carpenter, but that's
But
not
when I'm
that's
just-
not the
no.
answer. The answer is to fight.
Yes, it is. No, don't, that's not ever
Carpenter,
the answer.
please
You ever
don't.
win?
Let's.
You ever win any fight? Go to it and do it. Okay?
If you think for 1 second that me doing that is going to make them
It'll do something.
stop lying,
It's about a judge or something. It's about the law, not them.
but I have broken no laws. I have done no crime. There's no crime I've committed.
But I'm not saying that you have, but like,
Okay, well, me going to some
a
kind
judge
of
said-
rehab is not a solution.
yes, it is, because then you could get us back in time.
Why? Because April will stop doing this?
I don't know. Also, she's in the room, but
Okay, but you're the one talking about it, and I'm answering you.
yes, because I want to live with you, and we can't. And Violet wants to, and we can't unless you do what a judge says. So please.
The judge
do it.
never told me to do anything. I'm working.
Get a house, get money, and get a job.
Then go find.
I have money and I have a job. I'm working on it, you guys. There's not a minute that goes by that my focus is not getting you guys back.
Things that, anything to get us back.
I am.
We've always listened to a wide variety of music. The only thing that I don't allow is most of the popular pop songs because the lyrics are mostly about sex. When Violet was 7, this song was playing through the whole house, and I walked in her room to find her lying on her bed crying. I immediately sat down beside her and asked what was wrong. Through gulps of air, because of how hard she was crying, she said, "Nothing. It's just that the music is so beautiful."
Oh Lord, oh Lord, do you see us down here? Oh Lord, oh Lord, listen.
You know what Nate says about it? NF? NF?
Oh, yeah, what?
You don't remember his song where he says that he never was good at math, but what he was good at, he's pursues with passion?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't listen to him here.
You can't? Why not?
I can't.
He's a Christian.
Oh Lord, do you see us down here? Oh Lord, oh Lord.
What's up?
Didn't you say that you had? Violet? Listen, you're not supposed to be getting upset. You're not supposed to be making... I'm not getting upset. We're making plans. I never said I was getting upset. Okay. You just have to be talking happy things. Okay? Do we ever talk not happy? Why can't we talk about stuff?
Violet, if you're sad about something, you can tell me. You don't have to talk about happy things. Okay, but I'm just saying, that's not, the judge didn't say that when I talk to you that you have to be happy. You can tell me if something's bothering you. I just want you guys to know that I'm working on it and not a minute passes that I'm not working on it, okay? I promise you that I can't, my heart aches, and I am doing everything in my power to get you guys back.
Do you have a bed yet?
Yeah, it's a mattress on the floor.
Oh.
Not necessarily a bed, but a bed. I came up with this thing that on my route back home, there's this person's flower bush that sticks out of the fence. And the thing is, that you take off the pedal, and then you blow on the flower pedal and let it go in the wind. And before it hits the ground, you can make a wish.
What'd you wish for?
Can't tell, it won't come true.
Oh.
But I think you might know what it is.
I think you can tell your mom and it'll still come true.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I think that's how it works.
The wishes! There's wishes. Me, Carpenter, and you. It's that. I don't really care where we go or what happens. As long as we're together, I'm fine.
Oh, I love you so
I'm
much.
more than fine. My feet stink.
I love you so much, honey.
I love you too.
I miss you terribly.
Mom, if you're hanging out, just gonna let you know I love you so much. I love you more than anything. I trust you, and I love you, and you're the best mom in the entire universe. You're the best person in the entire universe, because you're so smart and kind and awesome, and I love you.
Oh.
Don't hurt your son.
You what?
I love you. I don't want you to hang up. I like listening to your voice.
Oh.
I love you.
I love you too.
Love you, Mom.
I love you, Carpenter.
She's trying to call.
I love you.
I love you,
Bye.
Violet. Bye.
Bye.
Take care.
You too.
Take
Hello?
care.
I don't want to let you guys go. I love you so much. I miss you so much.
Love you too.
I
Bye.
love you. Here, I'll give you a kiss.
Mwah.
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 I love you.
The river flows by as it becomes shorter. It never stops swirling in its glory. A man floats by in the river that never ends. He floats by as he thinks he sees a girl, but it turns out that it's just a log. The lonely man goes as he sees the swamp stop. There's no one on it yet, but then the girl walks up. You can't see her face 'cause it's under the umbrella. It starts to rain as she gets on the boat. They go through the river that never ends, swirling apart to a waterfall. They go down the waterfall gracefully, and it never ends, because there never
I did reluctantly allow my daughter to wear makeup starting at 10 because she's a really good kid and she really loves makeup. I was allowed to wear makeup at 10, and for me, and I think for her too, it was more about my artistic nature and having an eye for aesthetics than it was about trying to attract boys. Had my daughter been up to no good, talking dirty and wanting a boyfriend like a lot of girls her age do, I wouldn't have allowed it. But I didn't let her wear makeup to school, and she still had no interest in boys before she was kidnapped. That has changed, though, as she is starved for positive attention and affection.
But I had this dream. It was like pitch black everywhere, and there was this like white mist floating around the ground. I couldn't see myself, and I couldn't see the chair, and I couldn't see rope. I was like somehow tied to a chair. There was nothing there doing it to me, but I was like being punched or something. You know, like when you're playing a video game and the remote controller is shaking, like vibrating in the video game?
Yeah.
In the dream, like, it felt like I was vibrating, and, like, I woke up, I was sore all over, and I was sweating. I fell asleep a little after that, but it was, like, one of 3 most terrifying dreams.
My daughter told me that this is a demon named Banji that follows her around. My son's artwork also became very dark and even occultic. And he wrote what my sister said on his arm.
One, two, three, four. Though the days are long, twilight sings a song of a happiness that used to be. Soon my eyes will close. Soon I'll find repose. And in dreams you're always near to me. I'll see you in my dreams, hold you in my dreams. Someone took you out of my arms. Still I feel the thrill of your charms. Lips that once were mine, tender eyes that shine, they will light our way tonight. I'll see you in my dreams. In the dreary gray of another day, you are far away and I am blue. Still I hope and pray through each weary day, for it brings the night and dreams of you. I'll see you in my dreams, hold you in my dreams. Someone took you out of my arms. Still try.